Good morning. If we can get everyone to kind of settle down because we'll be beginning shortly. Thank you. All right. Good morning. Welcome to the HCPCS public meeting for DME, orthotics, prosthetics, and supplies. Good to see everyone. We commonly refer to these items as DMEPOS. My name is Felicia Eggleston. I'm your moderator for today, and I'm also the team leader for Part B drugs here at CMS. So we just want to let you know several things. This meeting is being webcast via CMS. The CMS webcast is live, and it begins as our meeting begins. By your attendance here today, you are giving consent to the use and distribution of your name, likeliness, and voice during today's meeting. You are also giving consent to the use and distribution of any personally identifiable information. So we ask that you please do not disclose any personal health information. All right, so the webcast can be found on archives after the meeting has concluded on YouTube or the CMS Ustream website. We believe it's housed there permanently. So some brief housekeeping items. If you need to go to the restroom, you'll go out the doors to my left, your right. You make a right turn, proceed down the hallway. You'll see the restrooms on your left as well as some telephones. If you continue down and make the left to the entryway for which you came this morning, and then make another right past the elevators and straight down those stairs, you'll see our coffee stand or jasmine stand in our cafeteria. So for security reasons, we have been asked to remind you that our visitors are only allowed in our public areas, which is our central lobby and our lower level lobby. If you need to go anywhere else within the agency, you'll need an agency escort or a staff member. So CMS is a non-smoking campus. There are camping stations available outside both entries of the guard stations outside at the gates. Okay, we'd like to ask at this time that you would put all Blackberries and cell phones on silent. We'd like to ask that all speakers, whether you're asking questions, giving a presentation, or answering questions, that you would please step to the microphone so that everyone can hear you. Okay. We'd like to ask for everyone's cooperation in adhering to their speaking times. Primary speakers, you have up to 15 minutes. 5-minute speakers, you have up to 5 minutes. Of course, the 15-minute speakers, you will come up to the podium and present where I'm standing. Any 5-minute speakers, we ask that you would take this microphone right in front of the stage, and if you're asking questions, you could use either this front microphone or the middle aisle microphone, whichever you prefer. Okay, speakers may not call on other speakers or designate any unused time. Only I, your moderator, can call speakers. And then as well, we'll have a coffee break or a lunch break, time permitting. So at this time, I'm now going to introduce Ms. Cindy Hake. She is the Deputy Director of CM's Division of DMEPOS Policy and of the National Level 2 HCPCS program. She will provide opening remarks as well as a brief description of the background and purpose of today's meeting. Cindy?
Good morning, everybody. How are you doing today? At least we have a nicer day for you than yesterday, the first day of our 2-day meeting. It was raining and kind of chilly, so hopefully the weather will get more towards what's more typical for this time of year here in Maryland. Thank you all for coming. We know that you're all very busy, and we appreciate that you go to the time and expense to come here and be with us and offer us your input here at our HCPCS public meetings. So this public meeting forum arose out of BIPA 2000. It was originally a requirement that we have an opportunity to gather public input about new durable medical equipment. And our first public meeting was, I believe, in 2002? 2002, and we had one item on the agenda on that day. And it expanded from there, and we got to see very quickly the value of these public meetings for us as well as for our customers, our applicants, and additional stakeholders. Sometimes we do change our mind based on the conversation and the input that we receive at these public meetings. So we expanded the public meeting forum to include every application before us of every category, not just DME. And I think our first year of that was 2005. So here we are today, and we have usually about 5 or 6 public meetings a year now. And today's the last day of our public meetings for 2017. Before the public meetings begin, CMS's HCPCS work group reviews each and every application before us, and we formulate the preliminary decisions that you see in your agendas. The work group includes members who provide input to us based on their knowledge of the program operating needs of all government and non-government insurance sectors. So we have representatives on the work group from Medicare, Medicaid, the private insurance sector, the Veterans Administration, and DoD, all considering your code applications relative to their program operating needs. So we publish our preliminary decisions and our rationale, and then via this public process, we invite input from the applicant and any interested party. And decisions are not made at these meetings. There's no debate at these meetings. We've put our cards on the table when we publish our preliminary decisions. So this forum is for you all to provide input to us in reaction to our preliminary decisions. And then after these meetings, the work group reconvenes and reconsiders every application that we have in the cycle, together with all the input that we've received, verbally and written comments, and we begin to formulate our final decisions. Those final decisions will be released sometime in the first week of November in a variety of ways. We publish CMS's HCPCS annual update, and in addition, we publish our preliminary decisions in a text and also a spreadsheet format. That trails the annual update by some weeks because it takes some preparations to pull that document together and get it published. But it's a very open process, and you can see exactly what we're doing. Between now and then, we will publish summaries of this public meeting, of all our public meetings, actually, sometime in August, and that publication will not include final decisions. It will look very much like the agenda you have before you, but in addition, it will include the major points made at the hearing by our primary speakers, if you just want to follow along and see a record of the public meeting proceedings. And Felicia Kathy's either told you or will tell you that this is also broadcast on YouTube, so you can always refer back to YouTube. So thank you again. We look forward to your participation today and appreciate your coming.
Thank you, Cindy, for that overview. Now, I'd like to introduce Joe Kaiser. He is the Director of the Division of DMEPOS Policy, and he will provide an overview of payment for DMEPOS policy. Joe?
Good morning. There are certain payment determinations from Medicare that result from HCPCS coding decisions related to covered and separately paid DMEPOS items and services. For us, we're bound by the rules of the statute. The statute has specifically mandated that fee schedule amounts for DMEPOS items and services be based on updated payment amounts from the 1980s, or which is when the fees were originally implemented, or if the amounts are based on competitive bidding information, we're bound by the statute to pay based on those amounts. Payment determinations resulting from changes to the codes for items subject to these rules must ensure continuity of the statutorily mandated payment rules. If a coding determination is made to use an existing code, then the pricing that's subject to this code would apply to these items. For coding changes for covered items, there are Medicare rules related to ensuring continuity of the statutorily mandated pricing. So if you have codes for existing items that are currently priced, and there are different coding changes, we must ensure that those payment rules continue. If you have a code that's exploded into components, so you have one code for an item that's exploded into its components, then the fee schedule amounts for those new codes for those components then cannot exceed, the sum cannot exceed the fee schedule amount for the previous code. If you have a code that's exploded into two or more different but similar items, then we apply the fee schedule amount for the previous code to those new items. If you have a code that's components that's imploded into one code, then we simply sum up the fees for the components to equal the fee for the new code. Then finally, if you have codes for two different but distinct items that are then combined into one code, we establish the fee for the new code based on the weighted average of the fees for the previous codes. Then finally, for newly covered items, where we establish a new code, the fee schedule amounts for the new code are based on fees for comparable items that are paid based on the rules of the statute. That way we ensure continuity of the statutorily mandated payment rules. So each of our payment determinations for items that are separately covered and paid would reflect those rules. And so we are welcoming any comments on the preliminary payment determinations for each item. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel, for that overview. At this time, I'd like to introduce some HCPCS work group meeting coordinators. I don't see them. Maybe they stepped out, but I'm still going to introduce them by name. Okay. So we have Judy Wallace, Nathan Hellman, and Kimberly Combs-Miller. And these are your work group coordinators, and they work so very hard to put together all of the details so that we can have this opportunity for public input. Many of you have had the opportunity to speak to them here or there regarding your HCPCS applications. Okay. Now, and I'd like to also introduce Dr. Prita, and, oh, okay, she is in here. Dr. Prita, thank you. Okay. And finally, last but not least, we have Mr. Charles Hirsch and a team behind the booth here, and they provide all of our audio-visual items here today. So before we begin this meeting, everyone should have received an agenda. If you did not receive an agenda, there are copies still available outside on the table. For each item on today's agenda, you will find a written summary of the application as well as CMS's preliminary coding decision. This meeting will proceed one agenda item at a time. You will hear a presentation from a primary speaker if there is one, and a 5-minute speaker if there is one. Okay. Then we like to ask that when the speakers present, they will state who they are, that you would state who you represent, that you would state your relationship to the manufacturer or the applicant, that you would declare in your oral presentation and in your written summary whether or not you have any financial involvement with the manufacturers or competitors of any items being discussed today. This includes any payment, salary, or benefit provided by the speaker or by the manufacturer, We'd like you to also state whether you agree or disagree with the preliminary decision, and when you summarize your statements, we ask that you would tell us why you agree or disagree with the decision. Okay, so now, after we've heard from all registered speakers, we'll open it up for questions. On to agenda item number 1, application 17.92. This is a request to establish a new level 2 HCPCS code to identify the HeartMate power module patient cable. There are no speakers for this item. Are there any questions or comments? Agenda item number 2. We have several applications. The first being application number 17.66, request to assign the Altrient to existing level 2 HCPCS code B4153. Application number 17.97, request to assign the Altrient Junior Peptide 1.0 to existing level 2 code B4161. Application number 17.99, Request to assign Ultrient Junior 2.0 to existing Level 2 HCPCS code B4154. Application number 17.79, request to assign the ENU Complete Meal Replacement Powder Mix to existing Level 2 HCPCS code B4150. Application number 17.112, request to assign the ENU Nutritional Shake to existing Level 2 HCPCS code B4150. And finally, application number 17.96, request to establish a new Level 2 HCPCS code to identify the ready-to-feed pouch with NFIT safety connector. There are no speakers for this item. Are there any questions or comments? Okay. Agenda item number 3, application, and this one has several as well. Application number 17.68, request to establish a new Level 2 HCPCS code to identify the Freedom Onboard Battery. Application number 17.69, request to establish a new Level 2 HCPCS code to identify the Freedom Home AC Power Supply System. Application number 17.70, request to establish 5 new Level 2 HCPCS codes to identify supplies and accessories for the Freedom Portable Driver System. And finally, application number 17.77, request to establish a new Level 2 HCPCS code to identify the Freedom Portable Driver. Our primary speaker is Mary Pat Sloan.
Good morning. I am Mary Pat Sloan, Senior Vice President, Global Certification and Logistics. I'm an employee of Syncardia Systems, LLC, and I have no additional disclosures. I want to thank the HCPCS Committee for the opportunity to present today about our application. Syncardia submitted 4 HCPCS code applications for the external components that are used by patients to ensure the continuous function of the implanted total artificial heart for patients who live at home. For today's presentation, we are grouping together all of the applications as each component is necessary in order for the TAH to function. The Freedom System components are used post-discharge and can be delivered to patients in the home. The work group denied all of the application because of a lack of program operating need. Syncardia disagrees with the preliminary decision because 1, the device is covered by Medicare under a national coverage decision by private payers and a growing population of Medicare states. When initially approved in 2008, discharge with a TAH was not possible. Now that it is, discharge is the norm, regardless if bridge to transplant or destination therapy. The establishment of codes for the external components are necessary to support the expansion of destination therapy coverage approvals that allow discharge to home. The codes are necessary for accurate claims processing by suppliers. Mechanical circulatory support devices, such as ventricular assist devices, have their own unique codes for their external components. Oh, yeah, I forgot. I have to do this. Similar to a heart transplant, most of the biological heart is explanted, and the total artificial heart is a 3-part system consisting of internal ventricular and valve components, an external component called a driver, and this is a pneumatic driver that sends pulses of air through drive lines that connect to the heart. In the hospital, a patient is connected to a large driver that is only approved for hospital use. When stable enough to go home, the patient is connected to a portable Freedom driver and is discharged. The FDA approval for BTT was in 2004. The CMS national coverage decision was implemented in 2008. We received FDA approval for destination therapy study in March of 2015. With the introduction of the portable Freedom driver and approval for destination therapy, as well as the IDE and HDE approvals for the smaller size 50 cc, this opens up access to this treatment for more patients with end-stage biventricular failure and makes the operational need more acute since there are no other FDA-approved options for treatment of biventricular failure that allow discharge. The HCPCS coding applications, the HCPCS coding applications were submitted for the Freedom Driver system. And to clarify, all of these components are FDA approved specific to the TAH. The components are not interchangeable with VAD components, and importantly, the TAH functions differently from a VAD. It is a replacement device, not an assist device. The drivers and power sources are mandatory for the TAH to function. Safety is critical, redundancy is built in, and drivers must be maintained based on FDA requirements. A patient cannot survive without a functioning driver. During the IDE trial for the Freedom, we made 49 supplemental FDA submissions, 7 of which were changes to the driver system. After the PMA approval, there were 13 additional supplements, 5 of which were changes to the system, which did not include supplier location changes or changes to labeling. All of them made the Freedom Driver system better and safer for the patient. When it was first used in the IDE, it was the Freedom 2000 series, and we are currently implementing the Freedom 5000 series. At each scheduled service of a patient's driver, it gets the most current improvements available, which are FDA approved. There are multiple program operating needs for HCPCS codes. Codes are required to fulfill claims processing needs for Medicare, some state Medicaid agencies, and private payers to report the components when the patient is able to live outside the hospital. Insurance companies are seeking patient discharge as soon as the patient is eligible and stable enough to go home. There are no current relevant codes, and DME suppliers are using various miscellaneous HCPCS codes meant for VADs. Using these codes does not accurately report or represent the TAH components. In addition, the lack of specific codes does not align with clinical tracking for claims processing under the NCD. Some facilities are reluctant to discharge patients due to uncertainty about inappropriate coding for suppliers and billing, and the lack of codes can create an uncertainty of coverage and payment and can compromise timely discharge of patients. Once the patient is living outside the hospital, the FDA requires scheduled replacement for preventative maintenance or if a driver is dropped, damaged, or malfunctions. Patients are at home living active lives. They go to work, they go to play, and because of continuous daily use, stuff happens. The DME suppliers provide Freedom drivers and external components to patients and need a mechanism to specifically report these devices and their replacements. The VADs and TAH are two separate devices that are not interchangeable. Without separate codes, one cannot distinguish the use of VAD and TAH components. A separate code would recognize that the TAH is a covered and used treatment for a certain patient population. We have different codes for the implantation of the devices and should have different codes for the external components. VADs, for instance, do not need scheduled maintenance. In the U.S., 137 patients have been discharged on the Freedom Driver for a total of over 25,000 days outside of the hospital. The longest was 1,650 days. The average is 185 days. And this will continue to increase as we do more DT patients. None of these are reflected in the coding or claims database because they're indistinguishable from VAD reports. Syncardia respectfully asked the work group to revise its preliminary decisions and to create the requested specific HCPCS codes that describe the Freedom Driver and the external components related to the total artificial heart. I don't think we have another speaker, so any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Sloan. So of the 137 patients in the U.S. that have used the Syncardia and been discharged with it, can you say, like today, how many patients roughly are in their homes with the Syncardia device
Roughly 25 patients are at home right now,
nationwide?
nationwide.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Agenda item number 4, application number 17.84, request to establish a new level 2 HCPCS code to identify Relizorb. Our primary speaker is Mr. Daniel Tassi.
There we go. Good morning, all. My name is Daniel Tasse. I am the CEO of Alcresta Therapeutics. I am an employee of the company. I have no other disclosures. Alcresta's mission is to develop innovative therapies to help the gastrointestinal complications of serious diseases. And I wish to discuss Relizorb with you today, and I believe you have some of the device in front of you, and ask that the CMS working group reconsider its decision and grants Relizorb a unique and separately identifiable HCPCS code. Relizorb currently is assigned a bundle code, and that is an access, a barrier to access. I intend to show to you today that Relizorb is not a generic enteral supply, that it has unique clinical benefit in high unmet needs for patients, that there are no adequate alternatives for Relizorb, and that there's a national programmatic need for a unique code. So what is Relizorb? Relizorb is indicated to use in adults to hydrolyze fats in enteral formula. It is the only FDA-approved I'm sorry. My apologies for that. It is the only FDA-approved product, drug or device for that indication. Now, we all know that enteral feeding is used as a last recourse in patients that have a need to stabilize or gain weight as a consequence of a serious medical condition. It's highly invasive. None of us would wish a loved one to have to undergo enteral nutrition as part of his or her care. But enteral feeding is even more challenging in a subset of patients that also suffer from something called fat malabsorption. Let's talk about those patients, because those patients are the Relizorb patients. Some enterally fed patients, the best examples would be patients with cystic fibrosis or patients with chronic pancreatitis, also suffer, because of their condition, from a non-functioning pancreas, which leads to their inability to absorb fats. Now, these patients cannot hydrolyze fats or lipids in their enteral formula because their pancreas does not produce the necessary lipase enzymes to do so. And thus, those patients don't get the benefit of the fat calories that they very much need and is intended to be delivered as part of their enteral feeding. But moreover, these patients also suffer from absolutely terrible gastrointestinal symptoms, as you could imagine would be the case if all of the fat in your diet went right through your digestive system because it's not absorbed. These patients experience fatty stools, diarrhea, abdominal pain, and nausea, which contributes to them very often skip meals, which further compounds their ability to put on weight, which is why they were put on to enteral feeding in the first place. But I want to be clear. Relizorb, I think it's a great product, obviously, but not all enterally fed patients suffer from fat malabsorption. We estimate that about 375,000 patients in the U.S. Are provided, 375,000 patients in the U.S. are enterally fed on outpatient basis every year. And about 40,000 of them, so essentially 10% of them, also suffer from fat malabsorption. So those 10% of patients could benefit from Relizorb. The other 90% have obviously no need for the product. Now, Relizorb was engineered and designed to address that very specific need, the need of fat malabsorption in enterally fed patients. It attaches to the gastric tube and pump, and the mode of action is very simple. and rather elegant. It mimics the function of pancreatic lipase, and it hydrolyzes fats just as it enters the patient's body, transforming the triglycerides, which is the natural form by which we find fats in our diet, whether it's a yogurt or a steak. Those fats are triglycerides, but they need to be transformed into two free fatty acids and a monoglyceride to be absorbed. And that's what Relizorb does, essentially allowing patients to absorb fats that they otherwise cannot absorb, just as they had if they had normal pancreatic function. Relizorb hydrolyzes about 90% of the fats in formula, so patients can get the calories that they need. The immobilized lipase beads in the cartridge remain in the cartridge, so the effect is entirely external to the body, and the cartridge needs to be changed with every enteral feed. Now, one of the greatest challenges, as you know, of enteral feeding is that it takes place overnight, typically over an 8 to 10 hour time frame. So to provide fat hydrolysis in patients who suffer from fat malabsorption, these patients may take something known as pancreatic enzyme products, or PERTs. And they take them when they go to bed, so they take a handful of these capsules at the start of their feed when they go to bed at night, and another handful of these capsules when they wake up in the morning, which is illustrated here by the green chevrons on this chart. Now, PERTs are FDA approved for patients who essentially take oral feeds to help with pancreatic replacement during oral feed. They stay in the patient's stomach for about 45 to 60 minutes, which is perfectly adequate for a meal that's consumed over that time frame. Unfortunately, for overnight feeding, as you can see in gray, there's no lipase activity being provided for the bulk of that 8 hour of feeding, since there's no pancreatic activity that's being provided. Relizorb's mode of action of hydrolyzing formula as it comes into the patient provides the means to hydrolyze fats throughout the night with sustained lipase activities. And that's the fundamental difference between our therapy and what currently is treatment practice. Moreover, PERTs are not designed for that use. They are not indicated for that use, and they are not on guidelines for that use because of the absence of well-controlled clinical trial data. So patients are currently using them because they're sick. They're very sick, actually, and there's no alternative for the product. But the fact is that Relizorb was designed for that very specific need, and there's no alternative, no therapeutic alternative to Relizorb. And Relizorb does have well-controlled clinical data, and this is a change from our submission of last year. The study was ongoing last year, now that it is completed and actually published. The study, we know was study 497, was designed to evaluate fat absorption, safety, and GI symptoms in cystic fibrosis patients being fed enteral nutrition. And the study is described on the left hand of the slide in front of you. Now, these were typical cystic fibrosis patients. They had been tube feeding at least 4 times a week, had been doing so for about 6.5 years. Efficacy was measured with and without Relizorb through plasma levels of 2 specific fatty acids, DHA and EPA, which were chosen. They're omega-3s, they're the good fats, but more importantly, medical literature is certainly very well established that in many serious diseases, DHA and EPA levels are correlated to better outcomes. The study was in 3 parts. Period A, run-in period, to establish safety with PERTs. Period B, establish the efficacy of Relizorb. And period C, establish safety of adding Relizorb to PERTs. And the study was published last month in the Journal of Pediatric Gastroenterology and Nutrition. And the results were rather remarkable. Relizorb significantly increased fat absorption and improved GI tolerability in enterally fed patients. But before I get to the results, I want to bring your attention to the box on the upper left-hand side of this slide, because the authors of the paper have made a very important observation, and one that I think is critical to how we understand Relizorb. These patients, besides being fed using best practice for 6.5 years, showed baseline levels of fat in their plasma at 60%, what would be seen in normal, healthy volunteers. Again, demonstrating that current treatment practice with PERTs is inadequate in providing proper fat absorption in these patients. The efficacy, left-hand side, as you can see, in blue, Relizorb improved fat absorption by 2.8-fold over control in gray, and brought patients to show plasma levels in a normal range within 5 hours and through 24 hours, which is quite impressive. Again, these are in patients that have been at 60% of normal for years. The addition of Relizorb to PERTs by providing better fat absorption actually reduced the number of reported GI adverse events. So here, typically, when you add a second therapy to a first therapy, you expect adverse events to go up. Here, they actually drop by 20%, roughly. And in patients who use Relizorb alone, they saw a 50% reduction in GI symptoms. Now, a question you may ask is, do we have long-term data, and do we have data to show that fat actually makes it to the patient's tissues, which is really what you would want to achieve? Although not on this slide, we just completed study 498, which is a 90-day study of Relizorb. That study showed that fat levels in tissues were clearly in the normal range at days 60 and 90, and those results were statistically significant. Alcresta has provided that study to CMS as part of our application. Now, on slide 7, these two studies simply reinforce to us what has been our experience with the product since we launched it. It is transformative to the life of patients. We share 4 stories with you here. We could have picked many more, but they're quite typical. Patients can now take enteral feeding because they can now tolerate their formula. They now have appetite for breakfast, and they finally gain in BMI. And this matters very much, again, because Relizorb allows a patient to get the benefit of the enteral feeding that CMS is already paying for, but where those benefits might be muted or reduced because of fat malabsorption. Now, unfortunately, the current coding recommendation for Relizorb, where you're part of a generic kit of supplies, is an administrative barrier to use. There is a programmatic need for unique code. First of all, Relizorb is a therapy. It is the only FDA product approved to hydrolyze fats in enteral formula, whether drug or device. Unlike the supplies in the kit, and these are the supplies in this kit here, which are made of inert material, this is a therapy. And Relizorb is used with a therapeutic objective in mind, not simply as an extension to the tubing, and we don't believe that Relizorb belongs in this kit. Moreover, as I mentioned earlier on, 90% of patients who are enterally fed do not need Relizorb. So to kit the two products together is, to say the least, unnecessary and wasteful. So that's essentially our point. This is tubing. This is a therapy. This is used in all patients. This is used in 10% of patients. We believe that a code that kits the two of them together does not serve patients or the public purse very well. Now, we also hear today the request of CF clinics, patients, insurers, DME providers, all of which have been telling us that we need a unique code to make this work. There are barriers to access for Medicare, Medicaid, and private payers, bringing medically fragile patients to not have access to the only FDA product approved for their condition. There is a programmatic need for a unique and separately identifiable code. There are also other pretty significant mechanical issues. Go back one slide here with the current coding guidance. As I mentioned, most enterally fed patients do not need Relizorb. So there is no way to delineate which kits contain Relizorbs and which kits do not. And it would be fiscally irresponsible to have Relizorb provided in every enteral supply kits to see 90% of them to be thrown out. Enterally fed patients may get enteral services from one DME provider. They may get Relizorb from another provider. You know it's not possible for 2 providers to bill for the same procedure. Thus, one of them doesn't get reimbursed. If a patient needs 2 Relizorb cartridges, then they're getting 2 kits, so the kit gets to be thrown out. Again, I don't think it's terribly efficient. There's also a very important regulatory issue that I need to bring to the attention of the working group here. The 3 codes we've been assigned, B4034 and B4036, describe clinical settings, syringe feeds, and gravity feeds that are off-label for Relizorb, and where Relizorb should not be used. Our patients are only pump-fed. which is described by code B4035. And again, that code we believe is inadequate for all the other reasons I've mentioned today. And your attention to this is critical. Patients now need to make a very difficult choice. You go without the product, or you pay out of pocket in diseases where financial burden is already quite significant. So in summary, fat malabsorption in enteral feeding is a significant medical issue. The current code decision has resulted in denied access to Relizorb. Patients pay out of pocket or go without the only product FDA approved for their care. Alcresta respectfully asks the HCPCS working group to reconsider its decision and grant Relizorb a unique and separately identifiable HCPCS code. Thank you. Yes.
I'm now going to call Mr. Al Farrow, Dr. Al Farrow.
Good morning. Thank you for providing me this opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Albert Farrow. I am an employee of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. As a representative of the CF Foundation, I wish to disclose that CF Foundation Therapeutics Incorporated, an affiliate of the CF Foundation, has provided Alcresta Therapeutics financial support in the development of Relizorb to benefit people with cystic fibrosis who tube feed. As a condition of the research award, Alcresta agreed to pay CF Foundation Therapeutics royalties for the resulting product, Relizorb. Alcresta has not compensated the CF Foundation or me personally to speak today. I'm a pediatric pulmonologist by training with over 20 years of clinical experience in caring for children and young adults with cystic fibrosis. My previous 11 years, I practiced and taught at Washington University in St. Louis as professor of pediatrics, where I was the director of the Cystic Fibrosis Therapeutics Development Center, as well as the associate medical director of our Cystic Fibrosis Care Center and our lung transplant program. This past August, I joined the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation as Senior Director of Clinical Affairs. The mission of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation is to cure cystic fibrosis and to provide all people with the disease the opportunity to lead full and productive lives by funding research and drug development, promoting individualized treatment, and ensuring access to high-quality specialized care. CF is a life-shortening genetic disorder that results in thickened secretions in multiple organs. CF clinicians focus on two central outcomes for caring for people with CF. One is lung function, and the other is nutrition. In the lungs, there is an accumulation of thick, sticky mucus in the airway, causing both airway obstruction and chronic airway infection, which can lead to irreparable damage to the lungs. In the pancreas, CF results in the inability to excrete the enzymes that are so vital to the digestion of food and the absorption of calories and fats. This is called pancreatic insufficiency. In fact, for centuries, until the latter half of the 20th century, children commonly died from cystic fibrosis because of starvation and malnutrition as a result of their pancreatic insufficiency. In the CF community, we are fortunate that exogenous pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy is available, and people with CF can take these enzymes in capsule form just prior to eating and absorb the calories they need. However, for some people with CF, this is not enough. Because of their increased work of breathing, chronic airway infection, and persistent elevated state of inflammation, the caloric requirement for people with CF is higher than for the general population. Some people with CF are unable to meet these increased caloric demands with just eating. Patients who are not able to adequately maintain their nutritional state tend to undergo further evaluations and interventions, and enteral feeds via either gastrostomy tube or nasogastric tube tends to be a last resort after exhaustive attempts at other interventions. Last year, based on data from the CF patient registry, 3,151 people with CF received enteral feeds because they were unable to absorb sufficient calories by other means and were at risk for malnutrition. Typically, these enteral feeds are provided overnight. Unfortunately, routine pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy is not designed for overnight enteral feeds, as they are relatively short-acting and therefore don't enable optimal absorption of the calories and nutrients provided by the enteral formula. Still, most clinicians will have patients who are on overnight feeds take the usual dose of enzymes they would take as eating a meal at the start of the feed, and then again when they awaken in the morning. And I did the same. The result of this approach has often been disappointing, with many patients going through invasive procedures to have these tubes placed, only to not gain weight because of the poor absorption of the feeds. By having the feed go through the cartridge lined with enzymes, Relizorb directly addresses the significant unmet need for better absorption of nutrients during overnight feeds in people with CF who are pancreatic insufficient. In clinical studies, Relizorb was shown to increase concentrations of DHA and EPA, omega-3 fatty acids, in plasma, indicating good absorption of fats when people with CF are fed with Relizorb. There's also data that is yet to be published that I received through a peer-to-peer communication of a subsequent longer-term study. In this, the ASSURE study, the use of Relizorb during enteral feeding was found to be safe, well-tolerated, and significantly improved fat absorption, as shown by increased RBC levels of DHA and EPA. In other words, Relizorb allows people with CF to absorb the fat calories from their overnight feeds. People with CF and their caregivers dedicate several hours a day to their care and access to care, and often face a significant economic burden as a result of their condition. The reality is administrative decisions that result in delays or barriers to access add to the already high burden of disease. Relizorb is the only product approved to address the significant problems of fat malabsorption in enteral feedings. It is in the best interest of those individuals who require overnight tube feeds to have timely access to this product. Granting a unique HCPCS code for Relizorb is a step toward ensuring patients who need this product will be able to access the product when their provider advises. In summary, poor nutrition is associated with decreased lung function and poor health outcomes for people with CF. Aggressive treatment of malnutrition is both appropriate and necessary. However, present-day strategies to intervene are often ineffective. Relizorb is a therapeutic option that not only makes physiologic sense, but has been shown in clinical study to increase levels of omega-3 fatty acids in people with CF receiving overnight feeds. I hope that CMS will provide Relizorb a unique HCPCS code so that people with CF will be able to access and benefit from this therapy. Thank you.
I'm just curious about something.
Please.
It's cleared for use in adults, and yet the vast majority of what we hear is use in children.
Yeah.
Are you working on expanded clearance, or
Yeah, we
is
are.
off-label use all we're going to see?
No, we are. Study 497 actually shared with you was meant to broaden our indication to include pediatric patients. Our pediatric submission was sent to the FDA late in 2016. We expect to get pediatric approval sometime next few months.
There are a number of prepared enteral nutrition formulas that have hydrolyzed proteins
Correct.
rather than intact proteins. I noticed you didn't discuss that in your study or anywhere in your presentation. I wonder if you could have a robust discussion about comparing and contrasting Relizorb with those formulas.
Well, it's a good question, and we get it often. Relizorb is actually meant to hydrolyze the fats because there are strategies by which you can compensate for the fact that patients don't produce protease, and you give them pre-digested protease, which is the form you're referring to. Unfortunately, triglycerides is the form by which fats are available in all foods, including formula, and are stable. Pre-digested triglycerides, as you know, are unstable, and that's the reason why Relizorb is necessary to complement what is trying to be achieved with elemental formulas.
Yeah,
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I apologize, because the codes say hydrolyzed proteins, but there are some modular products that my understanding is contained hydrolyzed fats. I apologize for misspeaking.
Yeah, there are no products. There are no products with pre-hydrolyzed fats. They would smell rancid. Rancid fat is hydrolyzed fats. They're not stable. Besides being
All right,
no fun to consume. Thank you. Please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the information you presented today. I am curious, in the studies that have either already been published or about to be published, is there any information regarding how the extra fat absorption in CF works?
In EPA, because they've been clearly correlated to lead to improved lung function and lead to improved outcomes in cystic fibrosis as well as many other medical conditions.
So that information is not available or would be available through other works?
The correlation of the use of Relizorb to long-term respiratory function, that work has not been done yet. Okay. But again, and I'll let Dr. Farrow has much more expertise than I do opine here, but those endpoints are quite relevant. I would also suggest something else is the day in, day out benefit of reducing GI adverse events in these patients is per se a good reason to use Relizorb. The long-term benefits matter. We chose a biomarker that we think is quite significant in that regard. Dr. Farrow?
I just want to add a couple things. We do know there's a clear association between nutritional state and lung function. For many years, it's probably close to 20 years, 15 to 20 years, there was a study done in children. So we really can't measure lung function in children until they're about 6 years of age because they have to know how to do the technique. Mm-hmm. And so if you look at their body mass index or weight for height percentile at 3 years of age, for those who come out at the less than 5th percentile, and you look at lung function at 6 years of age, there's a 10% difference between them and those who had normal BMI. So if we ever had if we introduced a new therapy, when now we have introduced a couple, but if we introduce a new therapy that makes a 10% difference in FEV1, we're celebrating. So just by affecting their nutritional state, you can improve lung function by 10%. And FEV1 and BMI continues to track throughout the ages and into adulthood as well. There's a clear association between the lung function and the BMI.
Do you know the statistics offhand in the adult population, let's say 18 and above?
So in terms of
increases,
you know, we don't really. What the data is clear on is going to be that that people who have high BMIs tend to have higher lung function, and people with low BMIs tend to have lower lung function, and that tracks through adulthood as well. But in terms of taking someone who has a low BMI, getting their BMI up and seeing lung function, we don't have that data.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Agenda item number 5, application 17.87, request to establish a new level 2 HCPCS code to identify the pulse flow DF. Our primary speaker is Mr. George Keckner.
Hey everyone, my name is George Keckner. I'm the U.S. President for Pulse Flow Technologies. I'm obviously not Dr. Lavery. Dr. Lavery had a medical condition and he was unable to fly, so I'll be filling in for him for his presentation today. But I appreciate your time. I am an employee of Pulse Flow Technologies. So anyway, okay. So who is Pulse Flow Technologies? We're a small startup medical. Another lower limb salvage. This is a lower limb salvage device. Essentially, it's software controlled ambulatory limb salvage device with an internal pneumatic pump applying pressure to the medial aspect of the foot. This is a Class 2 medical device that was approved by the FDA in December of 2015. We initially submitted for coding, as you know. We were issued 2 A codes, the A9283 and the A9279. We respectfully disagree with that decision, and we appreciate the opportunity to really present our technology and what the true technology behind our device can do. Okay, so the preliminary coding decision, this is where we disagree. One of the things we emphasize, and the biggest part of our device is the intermittent planar compression. That is really the key to the technology. When you initially look at the device, it looks like a shoe, looks like a boot. We can appreciate that. That's really the delivery system in which we were able to house a wearable technology and deliver and have the patients wear the intermittent planar compression, which increases peripheral oxygenation and blood flow, leading to better wound healing, okay? All right, so concerns regarding the coding. The preliminary coding decision really isn't in line with the FDA clearance terminology or function. 510K Class 2 was cleared for a compression limb sleeve compression device that has the same designation. Okay, so we can kind of walk through the product here. And Nick is should be in the audience. You have the product maybe to show the work group. Oops, let's go back. Okay, so this is where we have a little bladder that fires every 19 seconds. Okay, it stays inflated for a second at 160 millimeters of pressure. Everything's controlled by the circuit board that is in the shin unit. Okay, so obviously when you look at this, the patient would receive a pair of shoes. They have the shin unit here, which houses all the pump, the internal bladder, which is not active. That goes through a little tube to a little bladder that goes under the medial aspect of the foot. Okay, so this fires every 19 seconds. So what this does is it actually flushes the venous system, allows for the arterial return. So we see edema reduction in about 24 hours. We launched this product in the U.S. at the VA system. We've currently, have VAs using it from Puerto Rico to Guam, throughout the United States, New York, Dallas, San Antonio, across the VA system. We're seeing healing in non-healing diabetic foot ulcers in anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks. Okay, the other thing that this device does is it has a bioimpedance sensor. So compliance is a major issue with the diabetic patients. And essentially what this will do is it prevents the patients from putting it in the corner and then saying that to the doctor that they are wearing it. Doctors are able to monitor each week exactly how many hours and cycles that they've used this product. Okay, so what does the pulse flow do? We've covered it a little bit. Obviously, it stimulates the blood flow to the wound, reduces edema, allows for oxygen transfer to the wound bed. The current standard of care, the total contact cast. Some physicians use a Darko shoe. They use little plugs. They do offload. What our device does is it takes the principles that work, okay, from the gold standard products, which is TCC, total contact cast, and then we've added the intermittent plantar compression under the medial arch. So where we're positioning this product is that for the patients, physicians can heal patients in about, they know whether they're going to heal them in about 4 weeks. Okay, at that 4-week period, if they haven't responded to the total contact cast, that's where it leaves physicians a lot less options on what do they do with those patients. That's where the 50% that doesn't heal, there's really not a lot of options. That's where pulse flow DF comes in. Okay, so this wouldn't be to change what they're currently doing. It's just at that 4-week mark where they haven't responded to the current, gold standard of therapy, that's where pulse flow can come in and save limbs, save toes through the intermittent plantar compression, also using the principles from that obviously have worked in the past. Okay, so this is, these are some of the proof of concept studies that we've had that we submitted with our original application. One thing I wanted to focus in here, and hopefully this works, is the venous plexus, and you can see the pump fire. Is there any way to actually make this active right here? Yeah, so can you just hit on the so obviously, as these patients have poor circulation, our bladder sits right here, and obviously as this fires, you'll see these compress, and it'll flush the venous system, allow for the arterial return. Any way to fire that? Okay, so on the bottom here, this was our original pilot study that was done at Royal Free. It was 11 patients. We had a 78% healing rate One patient decided not to wear the device, and then one patient died from other complications. And we've submitted both of these studies, proof of concept studies. So if they can't get this, we'll just we'll move on. Not working? Okay. So in summary, we're looking to, position this product where, at the 4 weeks where patients didn't respond to standard treatments, that's where PulseFlow DF can come in, and we can help those patients and, heal those wounds that were non-healing. And so ultimately preventing them to go from, amputations, and ultimately for a lot of these folks, it's really a death sentence. So again, we reduce edema in the foot. It can be used when you have wounds you have an infected wound, and it also provides for protective footwear. The other thing is it also allows for the normal gait, whereas with the other devices they're off kilter a little bit. They have hip and back pain as well. Okay, so what we're requesting is that we're requesting an E1399 code to allow us to commercialize this product and allow access to Medicare beneficiaries, and that's what we're asking from the panel today. Okay, I think we have a 5-minute speaker. She was held up in surgery, so I'm not sure that she's going to make it. So I don't know how if we want to submit her testimony or. Okay. Okay.
George, if you can give me, I am not Dr. Trent, but if you can give me the piece of paper.
I have it back there, Marcia, I'm sorry.
Well, good morning. My name is Dr. Kiana Trent, and she is employed as a contract podiatrist for the Department of VA. And George may have not mentioned, but the PulseFlow DF is also in about 50 VAs throughout the country. In this area, and they're also going to be conducting a number of different studies, both this year and next year. Dr. Trent wanted to stress that her opinions were solely her own as a podiatrist and not of the institution or company where she works, and her background is strongly rooted in limb salvage and wound care, and she doesn't have any financial interests or disclosures with PulseFlow. She is as you can say, a podiatrist, and attended the Ohio College of Podiatric Medicine, did her residency in Baltimore, Maryland. She sees upwards of 10 to 15 patients, with diabetic foot ulcers. And whether the ulcers are diabetic or venous in nature, she knows the bottom line is to heal the wound as both blood flow and oxygenation, offloading, glucose control, proper nutrition, neurological and musculoskeletal evaluation, and infection control. With that being said, she sees a patient with a diabetic foot ulcer, baseline x-rays are taken, lab work is drawn, and vascular status is assessed, and ABIS are ordered if the vascular status is not intact. After evaluating the type of wound, whether it's a diabetic or venous, and what type of local wound care is needed, the patient is followed and measurements are taken. If there's not a 50% reduction in the other wound modalities or used, she would use advanced wound care products, as well as cellular and tissue-based products for wounds and other types of grafting. And so the question basically was that the patients that she uses this on is not all diabetic foot ulcer patients. It's a subset of them. And she says, when would I use the PulseFlow boot? As mentioned previously, if there's not a 50% reduction in 4 weeks, I start to search for other modalities that may assist in wound healing. The majority of the patients I see are uncontrolled diabetics with kidney disease or heart issues. A large number of the patients have neuropathy, poor vascular status, as well as poor nutritional status. These patients are in such poor health that it's not safe to move forward with vascular intervention or surgical intervention to try to heal the wounds. I term these patients with, she says, they're patients with poor protoplasms, and this is when I turned to the PulseFlow DF. I began trying this technology on patients with wounds that were stagnant and healing. In my experience, I've used the PulseFlow on diabetic patients with plantar foot wounds or amputation sites that have been dehisced or slow to heal. In addition, I see patients with venous stasis ulcerations and edema to the lower extremity. Some of the things I've seen in my patients since using the PulseFlow are a rapid decrease in wound size, decrease in swelling, and improved coloration to the wound. I like the PulseFlow as an option because it does several things all in one device. The important thing is the intermittent pump, which pumps for 1 second every 20 seconds, which helps to increase the peripheral blood flow, which in turn decreases the edema and aids in faster healing times. It helps to offload the wound by locking at the ankle and redistributing pressure areas, and also comes with a shoe as a contralateral limb, which allows the patient to feel more balanced with ambulation. The monitoring device on the boot also helps to promote patient compliance. PulseFlow is a viable option for those who are not stable enough for vascular intervention to improve blood flow, or for someone who may not be able to afford or even commit to the time needed for hyperbaric oxygen. Overall, the boot helps to create oxygenation and blood flow, as well as offload and redistribute pressure, which are keys in healing foot ulceration. I believe that once intervention is started with the boot, it's imperative to continue using the boot for the entire 12 weeks. And that's important to know, is how long the period of time that you would use this, while also performing local wound care to achieve optimal results. This is a ambulatory limb salvage device with an internal pneumatic pump and should be coded as such. I humbly ask that the HCPCS work group give reconsideration for the final coding decision for the device, and that the PulseFlow DF be granted the E1399 code. Thank you.
Do we have any questions?
Good morning. Thank
Morning.
you. I have 3 questions. One is related to your data slide. You showed the pilot study. How many patients were in that study? The second question, there was a comment you have use of this device in all 50 VAs. So how many patients is that? And of the studies that are to be conducted in the future, any of those comparative studies with compressive devices that already exist?
Okay. The Davis study was done by Dr. Armstrong and Dr. Lavery. That was our predicate device. So that the one right here is what you're referring to? This one? Right here?
The one on the far left where you have a
Oh, right
pilot
here.
study
I'm
to
sorry.
evaluate the safety and so on,
Yeah.
and 78% are healed. How many patients were in that
That
study?
was 11 patients,
Okay, and then in the 50 VAs, how many patients are using it?
several hundred. Okay, and then we have 2 studies going on, one with Baylor University for gait, and then we have another one with Dr. Lavery for gait studies, and then we have 3 other studies that are planned to start this year. One would be SUNY downstate. We have no comparative to another compression device. We haven't come up with that type of protocol yet. We're in kind of a weird group. You know, I mean, we have a device that there really isn't anything similar to this device. I mean, there's lymphedema pumps. That was our initial application, was for lymphedema, the lymphedema codes, and obviously we can appreciate that determination, and that brings us to here today. Other questions?
So I think just to clarify, other than that presentation of 11 patients, there are no published clinical studies anywhere?
No, sir, there is not at this point.
Oh, okay, thank you. We heard the statement that was read. Where do you see your device in the algorithm of wound care?
You know, in the algorithm, I would say, as Dr. Trent stated in her statement, it's really after you try the standard of care, which is TCC. Some people use an air cast and so forth. If the patients don't reduce in 4 weeks by 50%, they pretty much know at that point they have a non-healing diabetic foot ulcer. And that's really where we position the PulseFlow DF, is to take it from that point, which there really are not a lot of options for physicians at this point. So yeah, they use grafting, hyperbaric chambers, and so forth, but this device is a wearable technology that the patients can take home, and we've seen healing rates that have been very favorable.
And so would you say that in your future studies, which I assume are comparative studies, are they randomized controlled?
They are going to be randomized controlled, yes, they will be.
Will you be using wound healing and some durability period of time of wound closure as an outcome measure?
We certainly will. So, I mean, really what we want to do, and the uniqueness about our device is that once the wound is healed, you can continue with the therapy. So you continue that increased blood flow, which allows that wound to go from a collagen 3 to a collagen 1. And then we also leave them with a pair of shoes. So the shin unit that Nick's going to hold up, the shin unit actually is removable, and then they're left with the diabetic or the therapeutic shoes, which helps them in that remission period. We're looking to put these folks that have healed into the remission period. A lot of these patients, what we're seeing and what we've heard from doctors is that they'll heal the patient, but then they move back into their own footwear, and then they re-ulcerate. So ultimately, we're looking to extend that, that healing period. Then once the pumping is finished, which would be after, say, 1,000 hours, is where the device shuts off. Then they would be left with a pair of shoes. They should wear that throughout the next 12 months, and then hopefully that would, strengthen that tissue to prevent that ulcer from reoccurring. This reoccurrence is a major issue.
And you'll be tracking all this information, healing rates, durability of heal, et cetera.
Yes, we will.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
It would also be interesting to see if there would be any data at the end about that could support the claims that you've been making about limb salvage. And just one other comment on the shoe remaining after the pulse treatment, and that would be, you might want to investigate whether or not that would meet the criteria, at least Medicare's criteria for diabetic shoes.
Yeah, and we're currently looking to, we'll submit a separate application, and we will have a product called Foot Fort that we will also submit for your review at a later date, and we certainly can submit for that on this device as well to make sure that we're within those guidelines. Other questions? I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you for having us, and you guys have a good day. Thank you.
Okay, it's time to stretch. Brief coffee break. Please be back at 10:35.
So, unfortunately, yeah. They open. No, we're in Alexandria. How about yourself? Okay. Okay. Oh yeah? I was for 1 year. My wife for my 40th birthday. She okayed it. And after 1 year, she said, never again. She said, you're never home. Between days and between my son's schedule with a new travel plan. It was way too much. Yeah, I got enough friends that I usually get to so I find.
All right, if everyone can settle down so that we can proceed. Agenda item number 6, application 17.88, request to establish 2 new level 2 HCPCS codes to identify the Respirate. Our primary speaker is Dr. Henry Black.
Well, thank you very much for coming back after the coffee break. I'm Dr. Henry Black. I'm an old veteran of Baltimore, having done some of my training here. I did my internal medicine residency at Hopkins and Yale New Haven, and I've a fellowship in nephrology at the Yale University School of Medicine. I'm a clinical professor and director of the hypertension research area of the New York University School of Medicine. I spent 20 years on the faculty at Yale, 13 at the Rush University Medical Center, where I was chairman of preventive medicine, and in 5 years I was also associate vice president for research and dean for research. I've been the author of more than about 400 publications, book chapters, manuscripts, and about 220 abstracts, mostly about high blood pressure and preventive cardiology, and about preventive medicine, which was the department I was chair of. I'm a co-editor of the Hypertension Primer, which has had 4 editions, and something called Clinical Trials on Hypertension, which is a companion to Brown-Wall's heart disease. I am past president of American Society of Hypertension, and I served as the president of that society from 2008 to 2010. Member of the executive committee of the 6th and 7th Joint National Committee on the Detection, Evaluation, and Treatment of High Blood Pressure, which is the main guideline that we have in our hypertension business. I'm a paid consultant of Respirate, no other financial involvements or any competitors that will be discussed in this presentation. Now, I probably don't have to remind any of you that hypertension is a major problem in this country and a risk factor for heart disease, stroke, dementia, and many other things as well. It's been assigned about 14% of deaths can be attributed to high blood pressure. That's about 80 million people. It may be even more since it's not always clear. And the longer we live, the more likely we are to be hypertensive. Hypertension or aging is a risk factor for hypertension, I suppose. A large number of hypertensive patients, and many are on some or many drugs, complain of the adverse reactions. The more drugs you need, the more likely you're going to be seeing drugs that have side effects, and which is a problem. So the medicines we currently have don't adequately achieve goal blood pressure. We set these goals arbitrarily. For diabetics, it's less than 130 systolic. For non-diabetics, it's less than 140. But it's pretty clear from more recent studies that almost the lower you go, the better off you are. So high blood pressure is a risk for coronary disease, renal disease, strokes, peripheral arterial disease. And we haven't nailed down that it's a risk factor for dementia, but I think most of us feel that that's probably the case as well. So we guess right now, and it's a guess because it's not always easy to tell, about half of the patients who are on medication and lifestyle modifications are going to get to that goal. So additional therapies is certainly useful. And the American Heart Association has recently identified the need for further treatment modalities. This article, which we provided to you, was chaired by Dr. William Elliott, a former colleague of mine at Rush. And getting to goal blood pressure has been a moving target, but we're moving it down and down and down with time. Now, what Respirate does is this is an effective, and we'll demonstrate this, and safe non-drug therapy for hypertension. It's a device-based therapy that lowers blood pressure in hypertensive patients, and it can be used by itself or in conjunction with other drug therapy. The principle of operation is it modulates breathing rate, but also the inhalation and exhalation during treatment. So we all breathe, but if you breathe the way Respirate helps you breathe, you have a longer exhalation rate and somewhat shorter inhalation rate. The benefits are elicited by a process that lowers rate and alters pattern. And it works at in the sympathetic nervous system, which reduces blood pressure. This idea of doing this is not new. Some of you may have read Herbert Benson's The Relaxation Response. Basically, that was a breathing exercise too. But it's been very hard to do that by yourself. So the FDA has approved Respirate for prescription and for over-the-counter use since 2000. And it's an adjunctive therapy, that's what it's been called, and it's been recommended for lowering blood pressure in hypertensive patients, those who don't adequately reduce blood pressure with medications, and that may be half, unable to tolerate side of medications, and as our medications get better tolerated, there are still, once you get to the more resistant patients, the additional drugs that you add tend to be less well tolerated. It's also possible, if you can use Respirate, to lower the dose of antihypertensive medications, and many of the side effects are dose related. So these are the goals which I mentioned earlier. For non-diabetics, it's less than 140, that's systolic. For diabetics, it's less than 130, and we don't really have diastolic goals because as we age, it's classic for systolic pressure to rise and for diastolic pressure, in fact, to fall. And you can usually tell someone's age by what their blood pressure pattern looks like. This is something we have a lot of experience with. There are about 250,000 Respirate users to date. The VA is using this. I can't tell you exactly how many VAs have it, but they've been ordering it fairly regularly, and they give it to their hypertensive patients. There's no code for this because requiring many patients to pay out of pocket. And that is a major problem for some people, but not for everybody, but in the VA patients, that's not a problem. So many people who will benefit from this therapy and their quality of life as a result don't have access to this treatment because of the cost. So this is primarily used for a medical purpose, which is an elevated blood pressure. We feel this meets all the HCPCS criteria for a medical advice. It's not used in the absence of illness or injury, Hypertension, if you may recall, used to be called a silent killer because it was quiet until something bad happened to you. It's appropriate for use at home. You don't go in and go through the treatment, which I'll show you soon, in an office. You do it at home. It's not used in an inpatient setting or in outpatient clinics, and it can withstand repeated use. And it has to be given daily, the way we do for other chronic conditions, and we take our pills daily. There's nothing special about how we treat hypertension. We treat it every day. So this is what it looks like. It assists patients to breathe in a therapeutic zone, which we calculate to be less than 10 breaths per minute, with a prolonged exhalation. So it's not just in and out, it alters the way you breathe. It's a 15-minute treatment session at home by yourself. It's been evaluated in multiple studies, demonstrated efficacy and clinical effectiveness in reducing blood pressure in chronically hypertensive patients. So this isn't then a value for someone who has accident injury and gets elevated blood pressure during that period. This is for chronic hypertensives. It allows you to change your breathing pattern, longer exhalation, relatively shorter inhalation. And the breathing data is set, and I have an example of this here, if you'd like to see it. It's recommended as a medical device, the only one medical device for an elevated blood pressure. The California Assessment Forum, Device-Guided Controlled Breathing, endorsed this in 2006. They recommended, quote, daily use of Respirate for device-guided breathing to lower systolic pressure as adjunctive therapy for patients with persistently high blood pressure. They appropriately separated people who had acute trauma and had an elevated blood pressure from the people where this is a chronic condition. And more importantly, I think, and quite recently, is what the American Heart Association said. Based on an overall evidence from clinical trials and meta-analyses, this is recommended as a non-drug therapy treatment for hypertension. We have this reference here. Device-guided slow breathing can significantly lower blood pressure, and there are no known contraindications or adverse events that have been noted. Now, the literature review has shown much data on this. This is largely used. It's clinically significant. The average reduction is 14/8 when using Respirate routinely. People wonder, why routine? Well, we take our pills routinely. We take them every day for elevated blood pressure, for cholesterol as well. It's independent of medications, and there's been no observed adverse reactions. So the cardiology review paper concluded, which is here, this is a 2011 paper, that slow breathing with Respirate is a potentially useful adjunct to medication and other non-pharmacologic treatments for blood pressure reduction. Other non-pharmacologic treatments would be like diet and exercise. CMS described it as a biofeedback device. Well, we're not sure we agree with that. While incorporating some feedback elements, Respirate is an important therapeutic device directly affecting systemic blood pressure, using the modulation of breathing and consequently reducing the risk of significant complications. It's a lot different from what biofeedback would be, which is concentrating on clearing your mind. And if you ever try to do that, that's not very easy to do. CMS also said Respirate is an integral part of a procedure, and payments for that service include payments for the Respirate device if it's used. Well, Respirate is used by the patient. It administers therapy to lower blood pressure. It's not part of another procedure. It's not appropriate in the clinic setting. You can imagine if you were to use this every day, go to the clinic, do your 15 minutes, then go home. That takes a big chunk of your day away, and that's not necessary. Reimbursement is not available as part of another procedure or service, and that's critical. So to summarize, Respirate is a well-established, clinically effective treatment to reduce blood pressure in patients with well-established hypertension. This is not for the acute hypertensive. And they're not at goal, and the goals I showed you are goals that we seem to be adjusting. In fact, our goals are getting lower and lower and lower as more studies, such as Sprint, are now available. It doesn't have a code as a home device, such as Respirate. Denying this code impedes patient access to this treatment, which helps blood pressure management and ultimately helps prevent serious complications. We're quite sure that your risk of coronary disease, strokes, heart attacks, heart failure is directly related to the level of blood pressure. Can't say that yet about dementia, but we're working on it. So as Respirate meets all the requirements for a code, it's important that CMS issues a unique number for this device or similar devices so specific coverage policies can be developed. Thank you for your attention.
We have 5-minute speaker, Mr. Eric Gavesh.
Thank you very much. Eric Gavesh, I'm the CEO of the manufacturer of Respirate. I'm an employee and of course I have a financial interest in this. I would like to read for you a letter that we received last night, so I'm not sure you have it in front of you, from Professor William Elliott, MD, PhD. He's a professor of preventive medicine from internal medicine and pharmacology at Pacific Northwestern University of Health Sciences. And he writes the following: to whom it may concern, I'm pleased to write in support of the effort to establish a new HCPCS code identifier for Respirate device, which in my view can be a simple, safe, and effective method for lowering blood pressure that is generally free of adverse effect. I have a great deal of experience, both in research and clinical practice, with this device. I believe that the more widespread availability of this device, particularly with the reimbursement of its modest initial cost by CMS and other insurers, might contribute to an even better control of hypertension, which is ranked the #1 among all risk factors in the global burden of disease studies. And he references the Lancet and the JAMA articles from the past 2 years. I participated heavily in the design, execution, and reporting of the largest US clinical trial evaluating the efficacy and safety and efficacy of the device. It was sent randomly to half of the subjects, all of whom received home blood pressure monitor. If I may explain, so the two groups received a home blood pressure monitor that logged data, and then so half of the subject received the Respirate device by FedEx, basically, but no prior instruction or training from the health provider. The trial, published in the journal Clinical Hypertension in 2004, was supported by a grant to Rush University Medical Center from the manufacturer, but I never received any direct financial support from the device manufacturer. I have performed and reported several meta-analyses of the effect of home use of this device on home blood pressure, and references an article here in 2007. It was peer-reviewed for the article. I was a peer reviewer, I apologize, for an article about the device for possibly the most conservative publication in medicine, the medical letter, and he references, which concluded that, quote, it might be a useful adjunct and possibly an alternative to drug therapy for the treatment of some highly motivated patient with mild hypertension, end of quote. More recently, I was privileged to serve on an expert panel that comprehensively evaluated, quote, alternative approaches to lowering blood pressure, and helped to write and what eventually become the American Heart Association scientific statement, references that too, on this topic, which included the Respirate device, which was evaluated separately from other acute behavioral technique such as biofeedback. During and after the public meeting on this issue, I believe it would be important for the HCPCS work group to consider the following points. And the first point, he writes, the Respirate device meets all established criteria for durable medical equipment. 2, the Respirate device is intended for home use, for in-home use, and we and others have studied, demonstrated in several clinical trials. 3, among the Respirate devices used, although the Respirate device uses biofeedback, when used chronically, this device does more, underlines that. For example, slow breathing exercise performed immediately before blood pressure measurement lowers blood pressure acutely. We referenced that. But this effect is likely short-lived. In contrast, Respirate device has an important dose and duration response effect, which significantly lowering of blood pressure measured within 24 hours of last use. So when you use it, it lasts over 24 hours. Observe when the device is used to slow breathing for 15 minutes a day, beginning about 2 weeks after the daily exercise. So use it at home, if I may add. You use it at home for a few weeks and you see the next morning reduction accumulates about 2 or 3 weeks later, he writes too. Point 4, when organizing the American Heart Association scientific statement, the expert panel consciously decided to categorize the device that guides slow breathing separately, underlines that, from other non-invasive devices, including biofeedback, relaxation techniques such as TM, yoga, Qigong. I believe this justifies my opinion that Respirate device is more, underlines that, than a biofeedback technique. 5th point, the Respirate device has many similarities, I believe, with other types of in-home durable medical equipment that are covered by HCPCS code, specifically CPAP devices for hypertension and OSA, tongue suppressors, appliances for OSA, and perhaps even continuous low-flow oxygen therapy for chronic pulmonary disease, both obstructive and restrictive. Each of these provides an acute physiological benefit as well as a chronic improvement in blood pressure. Incident apneic episode for longevity and respectively. I'm not sure what that meant. Point 6. From the public health perspective, many hypertensive and pre-hypertensive Americans could benefit from using this device so that they might achieve low blood pressure without the inconvenience, provider visits, and the adverse effects that are so often accompanied antihypertensive drug therapy. In my experience, you can read, I guess, the rest for yourself. So thank you very much.
Now we'll hear from David Barone. You don't want to speak? All right, we'll open it up for questions.
Are there any questions? I guess we've covered things. Thank you very much for your attention. I really appreciate it.
Agenda item number 7, application number 17.91, request to revise existing level 2 HCPCS code P9072. There is no primary speaker, however, we do have a couple of 5-minute speakers. So the first is Dr. Paul Mentz.
Good morning. I'm Paul Mintz. I'm Chief Medical Officer of Verax Biomedical. I have a financial interest in Verax as well, and I'm here to address application 17091, and specifically regarding the preliminary HCPCS coding recommendations, items 6, 7, and 8. And I'd just like to say that Verax Biomedical urges CMS to modify Q9987 as descriptor to read rapid bacterial tests for platelets. We're concerned that the current code descriptor for Q9987, which reads pathogen tests for platelets, is overly broad. Actually, platelet donors and platelets are tested for more than just bacteria. All of the viral tests, for example, that are done and some other tests are also pathogen tests on platelets. So to say pathogen tests for platelets, it could be interpreted as an overly broad descriptor. And we're concerned that without a precise HCPCS code description to allow for appropriate billing of bacterially tested platelets, patients may not have access to these products that do offer increased safety and improved clinical outcomes. So we urge CMS to confirm Q9987 covers rapid bacterial testing devices and can be used with all separately coded platelet types, and I'll return to that momentarily, and in accord with, of course, their FDA clearance. We urge CMS to make clear in the billing instructions for Q9987 that rapid bacterial tests are covered separately as a reimbursable test under OPPS. Rapid bacterial testing is actually a critical option in tackling the persistent threat of contamination of platelets with bacteria. So we urge CMS to set an appropriate national payment rate for rapid bacterial tests, and without this rate, financially pressed hospitals and blood collection establishments may be less inclined to use the test to protect patients. I do want to call attention to the forthcoming statement from America's Blood Centers, American Red Cross, and the AABB, which is a joint statement which has been graciously shared with me in advance by the speaker. And this statement actually also calls for a modification of the descriptor, but rather than rapid bacterial tests for platelets, the request is for secondary bacterial tests for platelets. This is an interesting distinction. There is a class of platelet products that are derived from whole blood, and basically the technical name for this is simply whole blood derived platelets. These products are not conventionally cultured. There are some hundreds of thousands of them used annually in the United States. So when a rapid test is applied to these products, it's not a secondary test. It's actually a primary test, and one that is better described as a rapid test. And I also should say that pathogen reduction, as I speak, is not approved for this class of products. And yet the FDA rule states that there has to be some mitigation of bacterial contamination of platelets. And so conventionally, this is done through a rapid test. Now, why does this joint statement suggest secondary test? That's because there is another option other than the rapid test, and that would be to culture the platelet for the other category of platelet, the apheresis platelet. So it's not wrong to suggest secondary test, but we feel it's more precise to say rapid test. And I would also point out that the culture device is not a part of this application, whereas the rapid test is being presented to you. So I'm happy to answer questions regarding this distinction, but we think that rapid test is the correct designator, or rapid and secondary test could also be applied. Thank you.
Okay, now we'll hear from Leah Stone.
Hi, my name is Leah Stone, and I'm the Director of Public Policy and Advocacy at AABB, and I'm making this statement on behalf of AABB, America's Blood Centers, and the American Red Cross. Collectively, these three organizations represent the nation's blood centers, hospital-based blood banks, and transfusion services, and transfusion medicine professionals. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the preliminary HCPCS coding recommendations related to pathogen-reduced platelet units and pathogen tests for platelets. We commend CMS for establishing separate codes for pathogen-reduced platelet units and pathogen testing for platelets, and for making the new codes effective for dates of service on or after July 1st, 2017. We also appreciate CMS's recent revisions to the descriptor for Q9988, which now includes the term pheresis. In addition, we applaud the preliminary HCPCS coding recommendation to convert Q9988 to a permanent P code effective January 1st, 2018. AABB, America's Blood Centers, and the American Red Cross are concerned that the descriptor established for Q9987, pathogen test for platelets, is too generic and may confuse providers. Similar to all blood products, platelets are tested for a host of pathogens. We assume that Q9987 is intended to apply to secondary bacterial testing, including but not limited to rapid bacterial testing, which is performed at the time of release of non-pathogen reduced platelets. We recommend that CMS clarify the appropriate use of 9987 by modifying the descriptor to read secondary bacterial test for platelets. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments in response to the request to revise HCPCS code P9072. Thank you.
Our final speaker is Dr. Jessica Hanover.
Hi, my name is Jessica Hanover. I am an employee of Cirrus Corporation, the applicant that requested modification to HCPCS code P9072. My statement today will be very brief. As the applicant, we appreciate and agree with all elements of the HCPCS work group's preliminary coding recommendation to do the following. 1, existing code P9072, platelets, pheresis, pathogen-reduced or rapid bacterial tested each unit, made not billable to Medicare effective July 1st, 2017. 2, newly established code Q9988, platelets, pheresis, pathogen-reduced each unit, effective July 1st, 2017, adequately describes pathogen-reduced apheresis platelets. Number 3, discontinue code P9072 effective December 31st, 2017. Discontinue code Q9988 effective 12/31/17. And finally, number 5, establish new code PXXXX to replace Q9988 using the same language for pathogen-reduced apheresis platelets effective January 1st, 2018. Thank you all for your time and consideration.
Any questions? All right, there appears to be a question. Can I have the 3 speakers to come up? I'm not sure who's the question is for.
It's for Jessica.
Oh, okay.
And Dr. Hanover. Thank you. Thank you all for your presentations. And I wanted to ask if you had any comments on the proposed language revisions we've heard about today.
For the Q9987 code, I think we've had the representatives from both of the other organizations speak, and I think they know more about this issue than I would. So I think clearly the current descriptor should be changed. It doesn't adequately reflect the nature of a bacterial test. Pathogen test is too broad of a category. But I think both Ms. Stone and Dr. Mintz's understanding and explanations are more relevant. Thank you.
Agenda item number 8, application number 17.93, request to establish a new level 2 HCPCS code to identify the body trace BT004. Primary speaker is Mrs. Shara Lee.
Good morning. My name is Shira Lee. I am a manager at Omada Health, which is one of the healthcare providers that uses the equipment we're discussing today. So as an employee, that is my only disclosable interest. I do want to personally thank the panel for having this opportunity to review the proposal that you sent back to us to be able to discuss this today and to be able to answer questions. I really appreciate that process. So I wanted to start with just a little bit of background on how this equipment is used and what the need is for. Omada Health is one of over 1,000 providers of an intensive lifestyle change program called the Diabetes Prevention Program. There are about 86 million individuals in the United States who have a condition called prediabetes. They have elevated BMI and elevated blood sugar, and about 5 to 10% of them translate each year into having type 2 diabetes. So they are considered to be at a very highly elevated risk of getting type 2 diabetes. About 50% of the Medicare population currently has prediabetes. And given the current situation, it's estimated that by 2030, which is actually not very far in the future, the cost of treating type 2 diabetes in Medicare will be equal to the current budget of Medicare today. And so we're looking very carefully at opportunities to prevent the translation of people with prediabetes into people with type 2 diabetes. The National Institute of Health developed a program called the Diabetes Prevention Program. It's an intensive lifestyle change program that was proven to work more effectively than metformin, which was currently the standard of care. The CDC piloted this program that the NIH had developed, and based on the pilot that was done by the CDC, the CMS actuary has certified that it will save $2,600 per beneficiary that receives it within the first 15 months. Given the economics and given the impact on the clinical situation and quality of life, a number of self-insured employers around the country, private insurance companies, have all already started covering this program, and CMS has declared their intention to begin covering it on January 1st, 2018. The CDC has set a standard, and CMS has followed it for people being able to qualify for this program based on their BMI and their blood sugar. Most insurers around the country follow those guidelines, and so certain people are allowed into the program. The CDC has also established a recognition program for providers, and they recognize two different types of providers. One of those is in-person providers, such as the YMCA, where people visit once a week for lifestyle change intervention, and the other are virtual providers like Omada Health. A number of those virtual providers have all determined independently to use the same type of remote monitoring equipment because we feel that each have determined individually that it is very critical to the program. It is critical in part to the impact, and I will talk about some literature that cites that in a moment, and it's also critical for program integrity. The way that these programs are designed and reimbursed by all insurers is based on outcomes. Weight loss is directly correlated to the clinical impact, and so we look at the weight loss outcomes that people achieve over every month in the program, and we're reimbursed based on those weight loss outcomes. So it's incredibly important that we have a very well-protected, very accurate way to find real-time information on the individual's weight. And that's what I'm going to talk about today is our remote monitoring scale that we use to do this. So we have a medical precision, cellular-linked remote monitoring capability using a weight scale. It does qualify for durable medical equipment, and I'll discuss the 4 ways in which it does that. First of all, it's used only for healthcare purposes, so it is designed and engineered for those purposes. It's intended for use in these digital behavior change programs for the prevention of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease, and is not sold to consumers independent of these programs. It's used for home weight monitoring to ensure a high level of accuracy that qualifies for a healthcare provider. And it's used for cellular communications to the healthcare provider so that we can react in real time to the way the participant is progressing through the program. It's considered critical to these programs both because it has an impact on the clinical outcomes for the participant, but also because any manual entry using a traditional bathroom scale would be prone to mistakes or bias or inaccuracies that come from those scales. It is currently in use by a number of providers. It is in use in all 50 states. We have served over 100,000 people across the country, and that number is growing very quickly, especially now that Medicare has announced coverage beginning in January. These programs are also covered by hundreds of private insurance companies and self-insured employers around the country. The scale does withstand repeated use. It is usually used daily by participants, and the participants continue to use it throughout the program, which is often 1 to 3 years. The initial response that we received from the committee was that there is an existing code, E1639. It's currently slated as a dialysis scale, and the recommendation was to remove the word dialysis and use this as a scale code without specific characteristics. We do disagree with that proposal, and I would like to explain why, and I appreciate the opportunity to do so. The new code that we are recommending is a high-precision weight monitoring scale with cellular transmission capability. I'm sure you're all aware that ordinary scales that you would buy in the bathroom could qualify under E1639 if we change the description to simply be scale each. And we consider that because the high precision of this specific medical scale and its cellular transmission for real-time information are both incredibly critical to these programs, and therefore it's critical to be able to distinguish between a normal scale and a scale with those characteristics. It also allows us to ensure that there are quality standards for the use of these scales as perhaps additional manufacturers or providers decide to use them. Therefore, it's our conclusion that there is no existing code for this unique medical product with these characteristics. The other types of scales can be used by consumers or they can be used for other purposes and sold in retail, but this type of scale with these specifications is a unique medical product that is only used by healthcare providers. I would like to also speak to the situation that exists today, which is as follows. There are hundreds of providers and hundreds of payers who are already using this program. A number of them are digital providers, virtual providers, who are in fact already using this type of scale with these exact characteristics. Because those costs are now folded into a service fee that we charge to most payers at the beginning of the program, we've identified the cost of the scale and we ask them to pay for an initial fee that covers this. That's done through a service code rather than a DME code. So we are effectively acting as a DME provider, but without anyone's ability to track that because we're providing this DME code and covering it in a setup fee. It's therefore not possible to track utilization of this specific type of equipment. It's also not possible for payers or providers to know exactly which programs are using this scale. And because the scale is so important for program integrity, we think it would be very valuable to have a specific distinction for this type of scale. There have been quite a significant amount of literature published in peer-reviewed journals on this program, including virtual programs and including use of this scale. There have been 7 randomized control studies, 4 of which were for virtual provision. There have been a number of clinical studies, and there have been a number of meta-analyses, about 5 of them, which also included virtual provision. So I'll speak to a couple examples of those. The first is outcomes of a virtual program that in fact does use this scale. It was used with the Medicare population in Humana Health's Medicare Advantage population. 92% of the individuals participating were considered to be completers, and we noted a 7.8% weight loss at the end of the first year, which is considered to correlate with more than 50% reduction in the incidence of type 2 diabetes. There's also a second publication that I'll note by another virtual provider. This one looked specifically at the use of the scale and its impact, and noted not only that number of weigh-ins was a significant predictor of weight loss at 6 months, but that weighing in at least 3 times per week was associated with clinically significant outcomes. I think that's particularly important to note because it means they can't go to a location once a week to experience that clinical impact. They need to actually have the scale at home in order to be able to weigh in several times a week. The second 2 studies that I'll mention talk about the economic impact. The YMCA's program was the initial pilot of the diabetes prevention program, and it was shown to save $258 per quarter per enrollee. In fact, the CMS actuary who reviewed these studies specifically noted that it would save over $2,600 per beneficiary after 15 months. And then there has also been modeling done to look at the long-term impact, showing that at 5 years there would be about $4,000 of savings per beneficiary, and that's the last study listed here. So the summary of our response is that we do disagree with the proposal by the panel that we can use E1639 as scale each without other specifications, because it's very important to have a specific call out for a scale that is high precision and with cellular transmission capability in order to ensure that these programs can have the intended impact on the participant, and also to ensure program integrity so that we are able to very precisely and accurately track people's weight, which is used both for the impact and for reimbursement. Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Thank you for your presentation. So at the risk of embarrassing myself by asking this question, we're not aware of a Medicare announcement to cover these scales as of January. And I don't know, is this something coming out of the Center for Innovation? Can you give us a citation
Yeah, I'll make sure that I don't miscommunicate on this. So CMS has stated in the Medicare physician fee schedule from November their intention to cover the diabetes prevention program as a service. They have not stated a specific intention at this time to cover the scale. And so this is a separate process to make sure that the virtual providers who are using the scale are able to use that equipment.
So we're providing a lump sum, and the persons operating the program are making their own determinations within what inputs and materials and tools you need, right? So the scales are not separately billed.
Correct. Today, the scale is included in a setup fee to all the private payers. So universally, it's paid for by this setup fee. And then everything else after that is paid for by private insurers based on outcomes. The CMS reimbursement schedule that was published does not include that setup fee. It includes only the milestone payments for outcomes. Great question.
Hi, thanks. Can you just clarify, are you making an association between the scale and diabetes prevention, or are you just using that as an example?
I think I'll answer what I understood, and then if you'll correct me if I didn't quite understand. So these diabetes prevention programs deliver a lifestyle change program, and what I'm saying is that the use of this scale is essential for the virtual provision of those services, and the virtual provision of the services is essential to be able to scale this cost-saving measure across the population. Does that answer your question?
So how precise is precise?
There are a few measures built into these scales. One is that they go through quality control that normal scales do not. I actually don't know exactly the number of decimal points or the variability, but I know that off-the-shelf bathroom scales can vary between 2 and 3 pounds just between times that you step on it, and these are within 1 pound, but I don't know how small. I'm sorry, I don't have that information. And then they also perform an automatic tearing every single time before you can weigh yourself. So with the normal scale, you step on and you immediately see the weight. With these scales, the scale has to tear, so it has to reset itself based on any environmental changes around it, and so that increases the level of precision. Thank you very much.
Agenda item number 9, application number 17.95, request to establish a new level 2 HCPCS code to identify the relief chair alternating pressure jury chair cushion. My primary speaker is Ms. Lorinda White.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Lorinda White. I am from H&R Healthcare. I am an employee of H&R Healthcare, but no other vested interest in the relief chair alternating pressure Jerry chair cushion. As a manufacturer of support surfaces, H&R Healthcare is also very pleased to be a competitive bid winner for CMS, and we saw that there was a need not only for support surfaces for the bed, but a support surface also for the rollabout chair that Medicare does cover. To date, there are approximately 8,400 claims, 2014 data, for rollabout chairs in the home. This would be a cushion for that rollabout chair. I am the vice president of H&R Healthcare, and I've been there for 26 years, but as I stated, I have no vested interest in the alternating pressure Jerry chair cushion. We respectfully disagree with your decision that the relief chair alternating pressure chair cushion is the same as E2610. E2610 is a powered wheelchair cushion. This does not fit on a wheelchair. This does not fit on a wheelchair. This is a wheelchair cushion. Respectfully, is very different in size and in cost. You would not put a wheelchair cushion onto a rollabout chair, nor would you put the relief chair alternating pressure Jerry chair cushion on a wheelchair. It would be unsafe. Medicare does cover the rollabout chair, which is E1031, and therefore we are requesting that you create a HCPCS code for the rollabout chair for a cushion. As of right now, there are multiple cushions that are available under Medicare guidelines if somebody is and has a wheelchair. Therefore, if you're going to cover a wheelchair and provide a cushion, and if you're going to cover a rollabout chair, then there is a necessity for a cushion as well. The reason that we were denied for the wheelchair cushion is that it didn't adequately describe for assignment. The effectiveness of the powered seat cushion E2610 has not been established. Claims for a powered seat cushion will be denied as not reasonable and necessary. So you had suggested that we code this under E2610, but then when I'm looking up language for it, basically I'm being told that it would be denied anyway. My response to that would be that the relief chair cushion is not the same as a wheelchair cushion. The relief chair alternating pressure Jerry chair cushion has proven to be effective in the prevention and treatment of pressure injuries. Our pressure mapping clearly illustrates the clinical benefits of the relief chair cushion for a rollabout chair, which again is covered under Medicare guidelines. It measures 70.9 inches in length and 19.7 inches in width and has a depth to it as well. Wheelchair cushion standard sizes are 18 by 18, 20 by 20. Therefore, it is not comparable to a wheelchair cushion. H&R Healthcare respectfully requests a new HCPCS code for the relief chair alternating pressure Jerry chair cushion. It is an alternating pressure cushion for a rollabout chair. It will aid in the prevention and the treatment of pressure ulcers while a patient is out of bed. As we know, Medicare is covering bed frames in the private home and covering support surfaces if they meet the medical necessity. We also know that it's very imperative to get these patients out of bed. Any home care patient that had been qualified of medical necessity for a bed frame as well as for a rollabout chair needs to get out of bed. They are not the same patient that's in a wheelchair and is wheeling themselves around. Therefore, we're requesting that you please reconsider and provide us with a HCPCS code for this product. A powered wheelchair cushion, E2610, it does not fit the rollabout correctly. Again, you're telling us to use a cushion that would not be safe to the patient. The relief chair alternating pressure cushion for the rollabout chair is a custom designed cushion that we created. Again, we are a manufacturer of support surfaces and a competitive bid winner, and we did see the need and the necessity for it to treat and prevent wounds. The air cells gently alternate, and they interface with the skin integrity of the patient while providing and wisping away moisture with low air loss. The pressure is redistributed, and it's offering optimum comfort and pain relief. There's anti-shear, anti-friction, and therefore, again, it's going to reduce heat and moisture that can also create and cause skin damage. This is our pressure mapping of the alternating pressure rollabout chair cushion, and demonstrated in the pressure mapping, there obviously would be a clinical asset to the patient. Pressure mapping of this cushion would be very similar to the pressure mapping of any other support surface. E0277 is a support surface and mattress replacement that is covered in home care. by Medicare guidelines ordered by a physician, as long as they meet medical necessity. There are thousands of periodicals and research regarding the effectiveness of alternating pressure used as a mattress, and that same theory goes hand in hand with the cushion. If the patient is getting out of bed, then they would also need to have a cushion on their rollabout chair and continue therapy. The fee schedule at this point in time for E2610 describes it as a wheelchair seat cushion that is powered, but when I go into more information regarding this, it says very clearly this code does not appear on the CMS national fee schedule. So therefore, you're asking me to use a code that is not even a vested code right now on the fee schedule. As well as the fact that it also states that the effectiveness of E2610 has not been established. Claims for a powered seat cushion will be denied as not reasonable and necessary. There again, I'm requesting a HCPCS code for an alternating pressure rollabout jerry chair cushion that would aid in the prevention and treatment of wounds and skin integrity. If a patient at home is on a support surface because they have multiple wounds, we want to get them out of bed. We need them for pulmonary reasons, respiratory, for many reasons to get them out of bed and into that rollabout chair that you've covered. But if you're covering the therapy in the bed, then it needs to be continued while they're in that chair. E1031 is the rollabout chair that you are currently covering, and as I stated in the beginning, in 2014, there were approximately 8,400 claims nationwide. So there is a need. It is a service that you are currently providing. I don't have data to correlate how many of those patients in the rollabout chair would also possibly be on a support surface, but I'm sure that there's probably at least 20 to 25%. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions?
There you go. I do if I can figure out how to turn on the microphone. So will this cushion replace the cushion that's already part of the jerry chair? In other words, will you put this cushion on a cushion, or does this cushion go on the jerry chair frame as a replacement to the cushions?
I can't go back, unfortunately.
That's okay.
It won't let me go back
I saw
to
the picture. Just explain.
But currently, when a rollabout jerry chair is placed into somebody's home, it's a medical grade rollabout chair. So it has no cushion on it. There are no cushions available to be placed on it.
It's upholstered.
It has a, I mean, it's a covered.
Yeah, it has cushioning, right? It's soft, right?
I wouldn't say that it's soft. Have you ever sat in one?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a medical grade,
it's not,
so it's a plasticky type of material that's antibacterial so that it can be cleaned. It's definitely, I wouldn't say that it's soft. It's a firm surface. There's no pressure reduction properties to a jerry chair when it's placed. The only pressure reduction properties of that rollabout chair when it's placed would be how you're positioning. So by using the, sorry, I keep trying to move. By using the chair and repositioning that patient at home in that chair because it is able to decline backwards, then you are going to do shifts in pressure points, which will aid that patient, but it's definitely not pressure reducing or pressure relieving.
Okay, so second question. The pressure mapping that you did, what was the surface that was underneath your cushion?
So it would have been done on the rollabout chair.
Okay, yeah, because it didn't say anything on the slide.
I apologize.
Okay.
And we usually have a 180-pound patient is what we use, 180 pounds.
And was that pressure mapping with the patient in the supine position or upright position?
It was in multiple different positions. The one here would have been in a sublime position.
Okay. And do you have any clinical studies that support your claims of prevention and efficacy for pressure ulcers?
For the most part, it would be the same clinical efficacy as if it was a support surface EO277, alternating pressure with low air loss. It is the same therapy. It is the same technology. It's just being placed onto the rollabout chair versus the bed frame.
A little different, though, in that on a bed frame, with the exception of some elevation of the head of the bed, the patient's supine on an EO277 in a bed, versus your whole purpose of getting the patient out of the bed and into a rollabout chair is to get them in a more upright position to deal with the pulmonary issues and things that you talk about. So the pressure mapping and the pressure distribution are going to be vastly different in a mattress like that in a jerry chair or rollabout chair versus the supine position in a hospital bed as a hospital bed overlay for an EO277.
I respectfully disagree. Most of the patients that I have seen are in a sitting position in that bed frame, so the majority of their pressure is going to be on their buttock and their sacrum area, as the same with the rollabout chair. You're getting them into that position, and it's still going to be the same type of pressure that's being created. It's difficult to see because this is not blown up, but when it is blown up, you're going to have air cells. Those air cells are going to interface and alternate just like they do with the support surface on the bed frame itself. It has cycling times. You can change the alternating times on this dependent upon the resident's weight, patient's weight.
So if the chief benefit is a sacral area, why do you need the pad to cover from head to toe?
Well, the chief benefit would be in the sacral area, but we all know that we have wounds in lower extremities as well. Obviously, secondary would be that if you have somebody who is a diabetic or has poor circulation in those lower extremities, the alternating pressure is going to stimulate and is going to actually help to create blood flow to those extremities. So that is very important, as well as the fact for safety issues. You cannot put a wheelchair cushion onto a rollabout chair. It would not be safe. Whereas this covers the entire length of the rollabout chair. So therefore, one, you are getting therapy for the entire length of the chair, as well as the fact that it is safe. There's not going to be a differentiation in the plateau. Does anybody have any other questions? Yes, sir. So you would clean this just like you would any other type of cushion, whether it be a wheelchair cushion, whether it be the support surface on the bed frame. The patient's family members would just clean it like they would anything else. Wipes clean. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Thank you.
All right, agenda item number 10, application number 17.100. Request to establish a new level 2 HCPCS code to identify the Inflow intraurethral valve pump and activator. Our primary speaker is Mr. Jerry Stringham.
Thank you. I'm Jerry Stringham. I'm a consultant to VesaFlow, a U.S. manufacturer in the state of Washington. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today on this important technology. As the agenda mentions, this is the third time this topic has come up. The first after the technology received its de novo clearance from the FDA, and then the following 2 years. The objection to the request has been the low volume of utilization. So I'll present some more compelling and updated sales numbers here. But for those of you who haven't seen this technology before, or whose memory is a little hazy after a year, I'll summarize the technology and for what patients it represents and improved standard of care it provides. Okay. What is the product? Inflow is an inserted technology with an internal valve pump that allows a woman who cannot urinate in a normal manner to be able to urinate properly. This valve pump contains a rotary motor that is activated by a handheld instrument that the patient activates when necessary. So a woman in this case would sit on the toilet and push a button, the valve would turn, the bladder would empty, be kind of a normal urination experience. The Inflow valve pump is inserted into the female urethra and replaced every 29 days. Inflow is indicated for women with impaired detrusor contractility. IDC is a neurological condition that inhibits the normal function of the bladder, so the patient cannot void without the use of a medical device. Common conditions that lead to IDC include multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's. We were fortunate enough to have a patient here last year with IDC, and the value of this technology for her was demonstrated. And I would like to thank the panel here for the way she was treated and thanked after her presentation. It was very much appreciated. In order to go to the bathroom, these patients require intermittent self-catheterization or the use of a Foley catheter. Clean intermittent catheterization requires insertion of a catheter in the bladder to void. The patient or caregiver typically has to do this 4 to 6 times per day, requiring the use of a sterile and replaced catheter for each use. An alternative to this is the use of a Foley catheter, which drains fluid into a drainage bag, which obviously is inconvenient, reduces quality of life, and highly susceptible to infection. As previously presented, the technology has been widely studied. The pivotal FDA trial was a direct comparison to CIC with 273 patients. The existence of 6 investigator trials, none of which were funded by the company, provides Inflow with strong evidence of efficacy and safety in the investigational setting as required by the FDA, and outside of the investigational setting as many insurers like to see. And what is said about it? Well, the FDA took the unusual step when they gave Inflow its de novo approval, that it is noteworthy that the most common significant of adverse events, urinary tract infection, appears to occur at a lower rate with the Inflow device as compared to the CIC. The quality of life and avoidance of expensive infections are strong benefits for patients and their insurers. Also, the pivotal trial showed improvement in quality of life surveys as in the trial. Although CIC can be a good option, many cannot self-catheterize. And many women benefit from the use of this technology. They either cannot or will not use CIC, and Foley catheters are very prone to infection. We know that there are many restrictions on the use of certain indwelling catheters because of the high risk that comes with their use. These women in particular are good candidates for Inflow. But here's the new news. The request for a new code had previously been rejected due to volume. We're pleased to report that the volume has been growing. These numbers presented here show a nice mathematical progression over the last 4 quarters, and they show significant and continuous growth, which we expect to continue, particularly now that we have a PTAN number in place, which support more direct billing. So these numbers warrant inclusion in the HCPCS lexicon to assist smooth communication between provider and insurer when this technology is being used. So therefore, I disagree with the preliminary decision based on the information provided here, and I hope that CMS will consider adding the Inflow to the HCPCS lexicon. Thank you very much, and if you you have any questions, I can take them now. We don't have any other speakers, do we? Thank you. All right, thank you all very much.
All right, we're going to break for lunch now. Please return 10 minutes to 1. Thank you.